Hello, everyone. This is the 97th episode of the Soccer Nostalgia Talk Podcast. As always, this is Sean from Los Angeles and the Soccer Nostalgia blog, and I am joined by Paul from Shipley in England and the 1888 Letter blog. We are pleased to have Mr. Franco Spicciariello back on our podcast. We continue our interview series with Mr. Spicciariello as we discuss the matches of the Italian national team, this time during the 1985-86 season. Welcome back, Franco. It's been a while. How are you?
Hello, everybody. Thanks for hosting me.
Thank you.
Always a pleasure.
Let's go back in time. What was the state of the Italian national team in the fall of 1985, looking forward to the World Cup in Mexico, that they would be participating as defending champions?
Well, the Azzurri were in a very bad shape, very bad situation. While at the same time Serie A was starting to face some of the best season of its life, even as of today, at the same time the Azzurri were going down. Still were champions, 82, but they failed to qualify for the 84 European Cup in France, and they kept having problems with the CT, the Commissario Tecnico, the coach of the national team, Enzo Bearzot, was staying faithful to his own senators of the 1982, and he couldn't find the winning recipe that he was able to build for the World Cup 82. And that's how he, even after the failure in qualifying for the 84, he kept trying different things, but at the same time falling in the same mistakes. We're going to start, I believe, from the first friendly game, September 85, which usually has always been a bad time for the Azzurri to play because Italy always started the Serie A in around the half of September. So most of the times the clubs and the players were in a very poor shape, physical shape, and it always reflected on the results. And once again, that's exactly what happened.
As you've mentioned, the old guard from Juventus was aging. There was now a fresh contingent from the new Scudetto winners, Verona, in the mix. But were the press still on Bearzo's back? Were they wanting him to mix things up a little bit, freshen up the squad?
Well, look, Italy is a quite conservative country from this point of view, starting by the media. And like it happened for Lazio in 1974, despite Verona winning in a very, very good way the Italian Serie A in 1985, while the public was very supportive, the media wasn't. And Bearzot was stuck with playing only the players of the big clubs. So he kept calling the same, except for example, Di Gennaro, who replaced Antonioni as the regista of the team. But if you think about all the other names of that winning team, from Garella as a goalkeeper to Tricella, who was considered the replacement of Gaetano Scirea, who was basically untouchable, Pietro Fanna, they could be maybe on the bench, but they were never really considered by Bearzot as a real possible alternatives for the first lineup.
Let's get started with this match against Norway on September 25, 1985 at Lecce. By the way, this was the first ever international match at Lecce. And with this match, Enzo Bearzot was not only celebrating his 58th birthday, but he was celebrating 10 years as a Commissario Tecnico. So for this match, we have the following lineup. In goal, Giovanni Galli of Fiorentina. He'd be replaced by Franco Tancredi of Roma in the second half, 46 minutes. Giuseppe Bergomi of Inter, Antonio Cabrini of Juventus, Pietro Viercovod of Sampdoria, Gaetano Scirea of Juventus, Salvatore Bagni of Napoli, Bruno Conti of Roma. He replaced by Pietro Fanna, who had joined Inter in the offseason in the 66th minute. In fact, this would be Pietro Fanna's final cap for Italy. It was his 14th and final match. His first cap had been in 1983. Then you have captaining the team for tonight was Marco Tardelli. He'd be replaced by Giuseppe Baresi of Inter in the 46th minute. For Italian legend Marco Tardelli, this was his 81st and final cap. He would be part of the squad in Mexico, but from this match on, he would never play for the national team. Then you have Bruno Giordano, former Laziale, who was now a teammate of Maradona at Napoli. He replaced by Giuseppe Galderesi of Verona in the 46th minute. For Giordano as well, this was his 13th and final cap. His first cap had been in 1978. And we've discussed this before. His international career was a victim of the whole Totonero scandal that kind of sidetracked any chance he would have had for further caps and more stable play with the national team.
If I may, let's say that Bearzot never really forgave him for the Totonero scandal. Bearzot was a tough man, a nice man at the same time. All his players loved him. But when he closed the relationship, there was no way to get back. He had a fight with Manfredonia at the World Cup 1978, and former midfielder or stopper and libero for Lazio Juventus. When he was at Juventus, was possibly the best midfielder in the country. He never called him back. He did the same with Mancini during a tour in the United States, and again, he never called him back. That's how Bearzot used to. At the same time, he kept recognizing too much some of his senators, as you just said, Tardelli, but it was the same for Paolo Rossi.
And then you have Antonio Di Gennaro of Verona and Alessandro Altobelli of Inter. So Italy would lose this match 2-1. Alessandro Altobelli scored for Italy in the 26th minute, but Norway scored twice before halftime through Arne Larsson Oakland in the 39th minute and Vidar Davidson in the 42nd minute.
Let me say a couple of very bad mistakes by Bjerkhovod and by Cabrini on the two goals. And about Larsson Oakland,
yes.
If you remember, he was a player of the Racing Club de Paris that
Yes.
at the time became all of a sudden a club full of stars, because Francescoli, Littbarski, everybody went there.
Yes.
That was the real club of Paris at the time. But, things like those ones never really stay. Yeah. And personally, let me say, I hope it's going to be the same for Saudi, but that's a different story.
Okay. First match and already a disappointing result. Now, like we mentioned, this disappointing loss at home, it marked the end of the international careers of Fana, Giordano, and more importantly, Tardelli. What can you say about these last caps for these players?
Well, Giordano is peculiar. Okay, in late 84, he had a very bad injury. It broke his fibula, stayed out for several months. He was involved in a very bad relegation championship with Lazio in 1985. So he wasn't coming from a great season. He moved to Napoli, where technically he changed role. He became part of the top trio called Magica: Maradona, Giordano, Careca. Careca was the real striker. Giordano, in some way, got a little bit behind, and the three were exchanging a lot. But at the same time, he never scored that much like he used to do for Lazio in the late 70s. So he was not a real striker anymore. I won't say a number 10, but more like a second striker. Tardelli, honestly, nicknamed Schizzo, he used to play and run as crazy when he was at Juventus. When he moved to Inter, it was not him anymore. So nobody really complained about him except for him, obviously, because it's always been a character, and it still is, by the way. While for Fana, he had a good time at Inter, but honestly, Fana had a very interesting career. He started as a great promise for Juventus in the late 70s, then kind of disappeared. He never fulfilled those promises. Then he exploded in Verona with Osvaldo Bagnoli on the bench. Then went to Inter. He had a few good championships, but it was never that kind of winger that was supposed to replace Bruno Conti. Nobody could really replace Bruno Conti. We all know that. Who had been the real star of Italy at the World Cup 1982, even if obviously everybody remembers Paolo Rossi. But Bruno Conti was even nicknamed Mara Zico, a mix between Maradona and Zico, at the time, was an incredible player and a nice man. And, he also, too, went a little bit down, but we have to say that we will see it in the next games. Moving forward, the World Cup, it started to be better as a very high-level player, providing great assists in some of the games going towards the World Cup.
The next match and the last for the year 1985 was a friendly at Chorzo against Poland. But Poland of Zbigniew Boniek, who was now a Romanista this season.
Oh, yep.
Yeah. For this match, Franco Tancredi started in goal and Giovanni Galli replaced him in the 46th minute. And by the way, this Galli and Tancredi alternating would continue up until the World Cup.
One of the main mistakes of Bearzot, which became an important lesson for Azeglio Vicini in the next chapter of the Azzurri, having this two goalkeepers alternating in between the posts has always been a problem in terms of concentration. So he kept changing, having one as number one and the other depending on the games. It never worked.
Then you have Bergomi, Cabrini, Fulvio Colovati of Inter, captain of the side Gaetano Schirà. He'd be replaced by Roberto Tricella of Verona in the 46th minute, Giuseppe Baresi, Daniele Massaro of Fiorentina, Salvatore Bagni, Aldo Serena of Juventus, Antonio Di Gennaro, Altobelli, and he replaced by international debutant Gianluca Vialli of Sampdoria in the 78th minute.
Italy lost 1-0, goal by the Polish striker Czekanowski, part of a very good Polish team with people like the defender Zmuda, who used to play for Verona until a couple of years before, and then he went playing for New York Cosmos. Other good players like Wojciechowski, Bunkol, and Smolarek in attack together with Boniek. While for Italy, the real news were, the call-ups made by Bearzot. He called Filippo Galli. He called back Massaro after a few years, even if Massaro was in the 22 of the World Cup 82, but never really played. First game for Vialli, and also finally Aldo Serena. Striker, despite being quite similar to Altobelli, the two seem to match quite well together, I would say. It was a very good game. The midfielder, very bad on the wings. The team, early November, typical of the Italians, they go to Poland and they get frozen. It was a freezing day in Poland, while the Italians are coming for the still mild weather of Italy, and it was a big problem. I remember that there was a lot of discussion around it, that the players were not ready. And, despite a good game, they were never able to recover the goal that arrived after just 5 minutes.
What was the response to a second consecutive loss? Was this seen as significant, or were these matches not really seen as having a bearing on the World Cup?
I think that the press was very tough on Bearzot before World Cup 82. Then Italy won, and obviously when you win, everybody's your friend. But the failure to qualify to 84, honestly, the press was horrible against Bearzot. And E2 was very tough, really threatening journalists sometimes. He was a character, I can tell you, something you would never see today. I think the last one of those kind of coach, or maybe Louis van Gaal, that kind of character, just a little bit more silent. So, and he got a lot of pressure, but he never cared about pressure. So he was very stubborn sometimes. Again, a good man, but very, very stubborn in his choices and never listened to anybody. And unfortunately, this time we could see the results. And let me say again that despite everybody having great memories about Bearzot, his real miracle, his real masterpiece was Italy in 1978 in Argentina, where he picked the right people, the right young players. But because, for example, even the path to World Cup 82 was horrible. Italy barely qualified just for a victory against Luxembourg 1-0. So in some way, everybody was very surprised of how the World Cup 82 ended, thanks to an incredible Paolo Rossi. But then the reality is that from 83 we got back to the same kind of situation with just older players that got worse and worse. So, and everybody was just accusing him, you're not able to change, and he wasn't. While at the same time, we were starting to see blossoming a very good under-21 team under Azeglio Vicini, which became the backbone of Italy World Cup in the Euro Championship in 1988 and 1990. And we are starting just now to see very short moments for the Napoli that, will replace Tardelli in World Cup 86, Vialli, a debutant now, but we're very far away from the necessary overall that this Azzurri needed. And Berzot probably was not the right man to do that.
So we come to the year 1986. For the first match of the year, Italy hosts West Germany at Avellino on February 5th. Now, this is a West German side managed by Franz Beckenbauer, contains the likes of Schumacher, the Panzer, Hans-Peter Briegel of Verona, Lothar Matthäus, at the time still at Bayern Munich, as well as the captain of the side, Karl-Heinz Rummenigge of Inter.
If I may, for displeasure of the Juventus fans, Felix Magath.
Oh, yes, of course.
Hamburg, who scored the winning goal in the UEFA Champions Cup final in Athens in 1983 against a star-studded team made of 8 world champions plus Boniek and Platini. Incredible loss by Juventus against Hamburg.
So for this match, this time Galli starts and Tancredi replaces him in the second half. Then you have Bergomi, Cabrini, Vierkovod. Tricella starts this match in the absence of Scirea. And by the way, Cabrini was the captain in Scirea's absence. And you have Giuseppe Baresi, Bruno Conti, he'd replaced by Vialli in the 46th minute. Bagni, he'd replaced by Giuseppe Galderisi of Verona in the 84th minute. Aldo Serena, Carlo Ancelotti of Roma starting. Altobelli, he'd be replaced by Daniel Massaro in the 68th minute. And this would be Daniel Massaro's final cap for Italy until Arrigo Sacchi recalled him in 1994. So that's an interesting story in itself.
It's Berzot.
Yes.
and Massaro was a character as well.
Yes.
So at the time was a kind of madhead.
Yeah. So this match that was played on a muddy pitch, Italy loses again. So this is the third straight loss. Aldo Serena gave the lead for Italians in the 21st minute. West Germany tied the match in the 37th minute when Matthias Herget scored with a free kick.
Fantastic free kick from the center of the field on the right side of Galli that didn't even move. It was like Youngblood, poor man just died yesterday. When he saw that he couldn't make it, he didn't even try. That was possibly the only limit of Giovanni Galli as a goalkeeper. It was a great goalkeeper.
Germany would score the winner in the second half in the 75th minute. Giuseppe Baresi fouled Briegel in the box, and Lothar Matthäus scored from a penalty kick, and Germany won.
Yep. Just curious how Briegel caused the penalty kick in the World Cup final 82, and now it's Briegel that obtained the winning penalty kick, even if obviously this was just a friendly game. Mistake by Giuseppe Baresi. Briegel was very fast, and Baresi was starting to go down, as we were going to see during the World Cup 86. But let me say that in this game, Berzot started to make some tactical mistakes. An example, he replaced Bruno Conti with Gianluca Vialli. Vialli was a striker. Conti was a winger. Vialli used to target the goal. Conti used to target an assist. So basically, Vialli in some way replaced Pietro Fanna as a winger. Never really worked, as it showed by the career of Gianluca Vialli in the next years. There was one. Massaro at the time used to play as a winger, but as a striker and as a winger. But as you said, Berzot kicked him out of the team. Tricella started to play, but again, because of the fact that Gaetano Scirea was untouchable, even if obviously he wasn't in his prime anymore, we had the best libero of the country, Franco Baresi. He was never called up again. And when he was called in the previous years, Berzot was playing him as a mediano in front of the defense, not as a libero. Even if then Baresi showed to be the best libero and then central defender until the half of the 90s. So here we're talking about a Franco Baresi that was 25 at the top of his career and never present in the Azzurri. It was crazy. And also he started to call Giuseppe Galderisi, which I believe has been one of the most incredible misunderstandings of the Italian football of those times. He was just back from the victory with Verona and just moved to AC Milan. At the same time, AC Milan sold Paolo Rossi to Verona. But I can tell you that a few years later, Silvio Berlusconi, when he entered politics, somebody asked him if he asked for any kind of advice to Avvocato Agnelli, who was the owner of Fiat and of Juventus. And Berlusconi answered, I only asked once for advice to Mr. Agnelli. He advised me to buy Galderisi. I don't think I'm going to follow those advices anymore. Because Galderisi, basically, when he moved to Milan, his form completely collapsed. And basically, a year later, he found himself playing for Lazio in Serie B. So if you think about it, in 2 years, he moved from the World Cup to Serie B. That showed like he had possibly one or two very good years between Juventus and Verona, and that's it. But again, some way, Berzot was still hoping that Paolo Rossi could make it, even if his knees were not at the right level anymore. One thing was to eventually remove Galderisi from the number 9. Another thing was in case to remove Giordano, that at the time was playing for Napoli. If Giordano was in a good shape, there was no way to let Rossi play again. Again, another mistake for gratitude for his senators.
The next match, the next friendly, was on March 26 at Udine against Austria. This is an Austrian side. You have Bruno Petzai. At this point, he was at Werder Bremen. And Tony Polster, future Torino player. At this time, he was still at FK Austria Vienna. So for this match, Tancredi started and Giovanni Galli replaced him in the second half. You have Sebastiano Nella of Roma, Antonio Cabrini, Pietro Viercovod, Scirea captain, Salvatore Bagni, Gianluca Vialli started in the Bruno Conti role, Carlo Ancelotti, Paolo Rossi making his first appearance of the season. This season, he was at AC Milan. And he
lasted just 25 minutes.
Yes. And he was replaced by Galderisi in the 25th minute. Yes. Antonio Di Gennaro and Alessandro Altobelli. So Austria takes the lead in the 3rd minute.
Yeah. Crossed by Bruno Pezzei, mistake by Sebastiano, nicknamed Sebino, Nella, that was trying to cover him. But, when the poster with his head was fantastic, very hard to stop. Very tall player. So 1-0 at that point.
So Italy would score twice in the second half. In the 57th minute, Altobelli scored. 20 minutes later, Antonio Di Gennaro scored the winner in the 77th minute. So at least a much-needed win for the Azzurri.
Yeah, finally. Let me say great assist by Carlo Ancelotti for the Altobelli's tying goal. And then a fantastic goal from 30 meters of Di Gennaro with a very strong left shoot. So for the first time after several years, we saw a very good Azzurri team playing, and maybe except for Vialli in that specific role, the team was quite balanced, because Ancelotti playing in the 4-4-2 line together with Di Gennaro was possibly the most balanced team, together with Altobelli, was possibly in the best shape of his life, and a moving striker like was supposed to be Rossi, but more than him, Galderisi at that moment. While in the back, the defense line with Nela Cabrini, Vierkovod and Shirea look extremely, extremely strong. And Bagni covering both the defense and the rest of the midfield. So the team started to look good at the moment. But then other problems were on the way.
Ahead of the World Cup, we have a friendly against China on May 11th at Napoli.
Again, Di Gennaro and Altobelli, 2-0.
Yes. So Di Gennaro scores in the 23rd minute and Altobelli in the 33rd minute. So for this match, Galli started, Tancredi replaced him in the second half. Then we have Giuseppe Bergomi, he replaced by Colovati in the 82nd minute. Cabrini, Vierkovod, captain of the team Shirea, he replaced by Tricella in the 60th minute. Salvatore Bagni, he replaced by Giuseppe Baresi in the 75th minute. Bruno Conti, he replaced by Vialli in the 62nd minute. Carlo Ancelotti, he'd be replaced by international debutant Fernando De Napoli of Avellino in the 46th minute.
And future at Napoli with Maradona.
Yes. Then you have Paolo Rossi. He'll be replaced by Galderisi in the 46th minute. This was Paolo Rossi's final cap for Italy. His 48th cap. His first cap was in 1977.
2 years of stop between, as we all know, between 1980 and 1982.
Right, because of a Totonello scandal.
Yep.
Yes. So then we have Di Gennaro, Altobelli, and he'll be replaced by Serena in the 46th minute. And we should mention this was Tancredi's final cap as well, his 12th and final cap. His first one had been 1984. As after this, Bierzo decided that Galli was going to be number one. Let's look at Italy's final 22 selected by Enzo Bierzo ahead of the World Cup. Number 1, Giovanni Galli, goalkeeper of Fiorentina. Number 2, Giuseppe Bergomi of Inter. Number 3, Antonio Cabrini of Juventus. Number 4, Fulvio Colovati of Inter. Number 5, Sebastiano Nella of Roma. Number 6, and captain of the team, Gaetano Scirea of Juventus. Number 7, Roberto Tricella of Verona. Number 8, Pietro Vierkovod of Sampdoria. Number 9, Carlo Ancelotti of Roma. Number 10, Salvatore Bagni of Napoli. Number 11, Giuseppe Baresi of Inter. Number 12, backup goalkeeper Franco Tancredi of Roma. Number 13, Fernando De Napoli of Avellino. Number 14, Antonio Di Gennaro of Verona. Number 15, Marco Tardelli of Inter. Number 16, Bruno Conti of Roma. Number 17, Gianluca Vialli of Sampdoria. Number 18, Alessandro Altobelli of Inter. Number 19, Giuseppe Galderisi of Verona. Number 20, Paolo Rossi of AC Milan. Number 21, Aldo Serena of Juventus. And number 22, the third goalkeeper, Walter Zenga of Inter. Ahead of the World Cup opening match that Italy would take part in, Italy played an unofficial friendly at Mexico City at Estadio Atlante against Guatemala and would win this friendly 4-0 with Altobelli scoring a hat-trick, scoring in the 22, 65th, and 85th minute, and Galderisi scoring in the 71st minute.
Those kind of matches were very necessary to adapt to the altitude, which was a real problem, obviously, in Mexico. But let me comment about the 22 called by Bearzot. You know, again, gratitude is a very nice sentiment, but that doesn't work. Think about the fact that there were 4 players already present in 1978: Cabrini, Paolo Rossi, Scirea, and Tardelli, even if Tardelli and Rossi never played during the game. 10 of the 22 were playing already in Spain in 1982. And we're talking about a group that failed for 4 years. You know, several of them were older, were injured, and so in the end, for people like Rossi and Tardelli became kind of a holiday, if you think about it. while at the same time, Berzot didn't call Roberto Pruzzo. He's been Italian top scorer for years. But again, in 1982, he didn't call him because he didn't want to give a hard time to Paolo Rossi. In 1986, neither him nor Giordano, not to give a hard time to Paolo Rossi. And I still remember, because I was in middle school, I had my personal diary with some comics. And then the end of when the 22 names came out, it was this comic about a journalist asking Roberto Pruzzo, can you comment the call-up of Giuseppe Nanu Galderisi? And Pruzzo just laughing, which made perfect sense, honestly. So that gives you a little bit the sentiment of how the Azzurri got closer to the World Cup. No, obviously we were world champions, always high hopes, because let me tell you that, like, I was possibly complaining at the time of what was going on, but if I read those names and I compare to what I've been seeing the last 10 years for the Azzurri, then I feel really ashamed. One of the words I used at the time. It was a generation of champions for Italy that started basically in 1968 until 2006. We had 40 fantastic years, possibly we will never have again for my time life, likely. So it was still an incredible group of players, but as we're going to see, the Azzurri were going to face an even more incredible group of players in national teams like France and Argentina.
In this final unofficial friendly, you have Tancredi starting, Galli replacing him in the second half, Bergomi, he replaced by Colovati in the 66th minute, Cabrini, Viercovod, Scirea, Bagni, Conti, he replaced by Vialli in the 46th minute, Ancelotti, he replaced by De Napoli in the 46th minute, Paolo Rossi, he replaced by Galderisi in the 46th minute, Di Gennaro, he replaced by Tardelli in the 66th minute, and Altobelli. So Paolo Rossi and Tardelli actually played this match, but this is an unofficial match, so it does not count on the records.
One curiosity, while in World Cup 82, Berzot played with a team was based on the backbone of Juventus. This time you have 8 different clubs represented in the Azzurri, but at the same time, Berzot and even the Azzurri in general were not used to something like this. Today, it's the normality, because there's no, except for Real Madrid, Bayern Munich, but they're full of foreigners. It's very hard to see one team basically forming the backbone of a national team. At the time, it was quite normal, especially for Italy. So Berzot was not used to this.
Yes, in 78, he relied on the Juventus Torino block with only Antonioni as the only non-Turin player. 82, like you said, it was like 6 or 7 of the starters were from Juventus. But now, like you said, you're left with Cabrini and Scirea in defense.
It's a very different approach, and it showed immediately.
The World Cup started at Mexico at the Azteca. In the opening match, defending champion Italy played against Bulgaria. Some familiar names in the Bulgarian side. We have Nasko Sirakov and
Getov.
Yeah, and the goalkeeper Borislav Mihailov. For this match, Italy started with Galli, now firmly established as Italy's number 1. Bergomi, Cabrini, Scirea, Viercovod, Bagni, De Napoli, Di Gennaro, Conti, he replaced by Vialli in the 66th minute, and Altobelli and Galderisi. So Italy would take the lead just before halftime when Galderisi's free kick reached Altobelli at the right far post at the right side, and he just stuck it in. Italy would hold on to the lead until 5 minutes before the end of the match when Sirakov headed in the equalizer.
Yeah, it was quite a disappointment for everybody, I have to say. It's true that the opening game of the World Cup is never easy. We all remember Argentina losing against Cameroon. We all remember last year Argentina losing against Saudi. So it's never easy. Also, the Italian team complained about the wait in the lockers for the opening ceremony, the altitude. But, it's Italy world champions against Bulgaria, with all due respect. We're talking about Bulgaria during the Iron Curtain. So there were no justifications. But again, you could see how in some way Berzot became conservative again. True, he started the Napoli, and the lineup together with Bagni means that he really wanted to cover the team, supporting Di Gennaro and the fantasy of Bruno Conti, but at the same time expecting, like in 1982, to have a Cabrini really pushing as a left back. But it wasn't the same Cabrini anymore. Obviously, it was 8 years older than in Argentina and 4 than in Spain. You didn't have that kind of push that Italy had in 1982. At the same time, Galderisi played a good game, as also Altobelli, but they really suffered. At the same time, Vierkovo de Scirea in some way showed, despite being two fantastic players, possibly they didn't match the two of them. For some reason, they were never able to play together. And in the next years, Vierkovo showed to be maybe even better in playing with in a 4-4-2 in a line instead of just as a stopper. So, but again, disappointment. You can't tie with Bulgaria in the opening cup when you're world champion.
Yes.
And the attack to Berzot, you can barely imagine that, what happened here.
A few days later, on June 5th at Puebla, they face Argentina of Diego Maradona, future World Cup champions. So for this match, we have Galli, Bergomi, Cabrini, Scirea, Vierkovo, Bagni, De Napoli. He replaced by Giuseppe Baresi, 87th minute. Di Gennaro, Conti, he replaced by Vialli in the 65th minute. Altobelli and Galderisi. And Argentina, we know all the familiar names. Besides Maradona, you have Jorge Valdano of Real Madrid, Jorge Burruchaga, and Sergio Batista, Neri Pumpido in goal. Italy actually takes the lead in the 6th minute when Oscar Gare handles in the penalty box and Altobelli scored from the penalty kick. Then you have one of the most beautiful reference goals in World Cup history in the 34th minute, where Giusti from the middle passes to Valdano, who immediately sends Maradona through, who scores like up in the air with the side of his foot past Galli.
And again, Galli didn't even try, as we were saying before. Look, I would say this is the central game of the World Cup for Italy. Is when we really realized that we were not at the same level, despite a game that ended up in a tie. Berzot made mistakes. It started very well with the error of Burruchaga and Garre. So we went ahead of 1 goal. But the main error by Berzot was to have Salvatore Bagni marking his teammates and friend Diego Maradona, instead of having Beppe Bergomi, which would have been like Claudio Gentile in 1982. He made a kind of psychological game that showed it to be a mistake, because having Bagni following Maradona in the best moment of his career meant that it could help the midfield, and add this to a bad day of the Napoli and Di Gennaro, and you have that's where Italy really lost the game in the midfield. At the same time, when Valdano anticipated Scirea, I would say that was the moment where Scirea's career showed that to be basically over. He had never been so slow in his life. And you have Valdano, there was never a lightning, very good player, but not a lightning, overcoming Scirea in that way. And then you had Galli that didn't even try, but possibly. I think he evaluated the ball possibly on the post or out, but again, he didn't even try. So then Italy hit a goal post with Bruno Conti, but then for some reason Berzot replaced Bruno Conti with Vialli, pushing him ahead, but nothing really happened. And with Argentina beating Bulgaria, we knew that we were going to be second in the group anyway, likely. And we were going to play against France, that was the European champion. But then we had first another game with South Korea.
So in a way, this match was like a diplomatic tie between the teams.
No, unexpected for Italy. We were expecting to win because we knew that if we were going to win this game, it was going to be like against Brazil in '82. It was a turning point. We gave the maximum, but even giving the maximum was not going to be enough. All the limits of that team came out.
And we should mention this was the 4th straight World Cup that Italy had faced Argentina, and it would be 5 times by the next World Cup.
Yeah, unfortunately.
So now we come to the last match in the group on June 10th, again at Puebla against South Korea, which obviously most observers would have assumed it would have been a formality for the Italians. The Azzurri wearing white this time. You have Galli, Cabrini, Scirea, Vierkovod, Bagni, he replaced by Giuseppe Baresi in the 67th minute, De Napoli, Di Gennaro, Conti, Altobelli, Galderisi, and he replaced by Vialli in the 88th minute. At least this time, Vialli replaced a striker and not Conti, a winger. So Italy would win this match 3-2. However, Altobelli would miss a penalty kick in the 36th minute. Bergomi would get a yellow card and he would be suspended for the next match against France.
Replaced by Pietro Vierkovod as a right back, which I never seen him playing in that role. Against very weird decisions by Berzotto. But let's say, in some way, in this game, if you look back and you can make different analysis when you look at the past with today's eyes. A globalization was starting. You had a player like Boom Kung Cha, the Korean was playing in West Germany at the time. But globalization really increased the level of football everywhere, and also it was a very young team. And despite the altitude, were running as crazy. And Italy had a problem, even if the very stubborn Italian media were expecting like a goleada, a bunch of goals, as if 1966 against North Korea didn't teach us a lesson, where Italy lost 1-0 with a goal of the Korean dentist Pak Do-ik. So, but it was a victory, a deserved victory, but not a great game, and also weird decisions. But you get Italy got 4 goals in 3 games. That's an alarming. If you look at the data points, that's an alarming data point. Which was just a start.
Let's point out that this was Fulvio Colovati's 50th and final cap for Italy. His first cap had been in 1979. The defender famous for playing for both sides of Milan in his career. So Italy won this match 3-2. At least Altobelli was showing fine form. This was his 4th goal in these 3 matches. He scored in the 17th and the 73rd minute. Italy were beneficiary of an own goal in the 82nd minute. But the Koreans replied back twice, once in the 67th minute and once just before the end in the 89th minute. So a win for Italy, but not an impressive win.
Nope.
Italy qualified to the second round, and their second round opponents were France of the Juventino Michel Platini and other recognizable names. We have Alain Giresse, Dominic Rocheteau, Tigana. Yeah. So Luis Fernandez. Yeah, Batistone, a lot of good players. Amoros, yeah. This match on June 17th at Mexico City at Estadio Olimpico Universitario. So Italy starts with Galli playing in his 19th and final cap. His first cap was in 1983. Bergomi, Cabrini, Scirea, This was Shiraz's 78th and final cap. His first cap was in 1975. Pietro Vierkovod. This would be Pietro Vierkovod's final cap until 1990, as Azeglio Vicini discarded him early in his reign, but recalled him after he was showing good form for Sampdoria as a veteran. Then you have Salvatore Bagni, Giuseppe Baresi. He would be replaced by Antonio Di Gennaro in the 46th minute. For both of them, Giuseppe, brother of Franco, this was his 18th and final cap. His first cap was in 1979. For Antonio Di Gennaro, this was his 15th and final cap. His first cap was in 1984. Fernando De Napoli, Bruno Conti. Again, this was Bruno Conti's 47th and final cap. His first cap was in 1980. Alessandro Altobelli, Giuseppe Galderisi. He'd be replaced by Vialli in the 58th minute. And for Galderisi, this was his 10th and final cap. His first cap was in 1985.
Too many.
Well, as far as the match itself, the dominant French side defeated the older, more tired Italians 2-0. Yeah. Platini scored in the 15th minute, and Yannick Stopira scored in the 57th minute. Italy, at this point, Italy were on their last legs, basically.
Well, look, Sean, the reality is that possibly not even Berzot believed in the team he had anymore. He was never enthusiastic, which is showed by the fact that he kept changing people on the ground. So he made this final mistake. He decided to change everything. He sent the regista Di Gennaro on the bench, while he has been one of the few bright spots in the past years. And he played Beppe Baresi, the hammer, to mark Michel Platini. Very old approach, which worked until 1982. Didn't work with Maradona, obviously didn't work with Platini, even if the Platini that we had seen until that point wasn't really in the best shape ever. He was starting to get older, and he would retire very soon after the World Cup. And also, Baresi, let's say, didn't really have educated feet. And in some way, the Azzurri felt like that they were defending. There was nobody creating something in the middle of the field. While on the other side, you didn't have just Platini. You had Gires, you had Tigana, you had Rosto. You have even like the defender like Amorò and Battiston were able to build the game. So it was a huge difference. And it was like accepting the fact that we had to defend ourselves. But in the end, who made the mistake was Giuseppe Baresi. He lost the ball with Fernandez. Ball to Rosto, ball to Platini, goal. And again, Galli tried to go out, but a lob killed him. First goal, then second goal by Stopira. Italy was never in the game. So it was really the end of everything and the end of a cycle. And consider that Berzot obtained a 4 years renewal of his contract just before the World Cup. But, he too knew that everything was over. And also, while watching the other game, you could see there was a complete novel bug in the world football from Denmark, Spain, Belgium, USSR. Italy was that team was kind of a representative of an old football. And that game played in that way with those men was really a representation of that. And we were rightly eliminated from the World Cup, unfortunately.
I can't imagine the Italian public expected a triumph given the last 4 years. But were there expectations for a better showing?
Yes, also because, the Italians accept to be criticized and beaten by everybody but France. So losing against France was the possible way out, and the level of the polemic was terrifying. There were requests for the firing of Berzot. He called the Juventus players out, Rossi, Tardelli, all of them. And indeed, the Azzurri went to a complete reshuffle with the appointment a few weeks later of Azeglio Vicini, the Commissario Tecnico Citti, the coach of the Azzurri under-21, which were winning the European Championship, and showed a very new way of playing, fresher, different approach. Also, at the same time, you had the new AC Milan, because the first year with Lidl was still kind of old about the Zona, was starting to change the Italian football. We were going through a change. And that was starting, I would say, the day after the loss with France. And that's why also Vicini immediately called people like Franco Baresi and decided to play Gianluca Vialli and Roberto Mancini, were the new stars of the Italian football at the center of the attack, supporting obviously Alessandro Tobelli, that had been the only real bright spot of that World Cup for Italy, together with Nando De Napoli in some way, who didn't really have a great championship.
You've spoken about Bearzot's loyalty to certain players. Paolo Rossi and Marco Tardelli went to this World Cup but were not used at all. Do you think they were picked just for sentimental reasons?
Absolutely, yes. Even Bearzot said that. Even Paolo Rossi said that later, that it was a recognition to his career, a recognition to the fact that he couldn't play him in Euro 1980, because Bearzot always believed in Paolo Rossi's innocence for the Totonero, and the truth is that he was innocent. He was a scapegoat and was never involved in any kind of betting activity at the time. But Italy has this, let's call them storms, where they become kind of a witch hunt, but I can tell you, if at the time Paolo Rossi was playing for clubs like Juventus or Inter, he would have never been convicted, because it was really never part of that scandal.
In addition to Rossi and Tardelli, this World Cup was also the end of the road for Colovatti, Galli, Tancredi, Scirea, Conti, Galderisi, Di Gennaro, Beppe Baresi, as well as Pietro Viercovot, who would only return in 1990. It was a remarkable turnover, but perhaps these were players who should not have been in the team for many years before.
Yeah, well, the first player that comes to my mind is Pietro Viercovot. He has been the best Italian stopper or central defender since possibly 1981. 1980 was a Como, but from 1981 until 92, 93. But because of the fact that he had been playing for Como, AS Roma, Sampdoria, Fiorentina, and consider that wherever he went, he pushed the club to a victory or close to a victory. He won the Scudetto with Roma. He won the Scudetto with Sampdoria. He went very close, 1 point, to the Scudetto with Fiorentina. He was always on loan from Sampdoria. He was the best. And even Van Basten, remember, the hardest player he played against was Pietro Viercovot. It was the only one that he really suffered. But Viercovot also admitted, yes, I kicked him a lot, but he kicked me as well a lot. So Van Basten was very, very nice, classy guy, but it could be a beast on the field like any other great striker, obviously. So that's one. Another one that was missing, we had Bruno Conti, but then you were playing Fanna, Vialli, was Roberto Donadoni. Could be both a regista or, even better, a winger, both right and left. At the time, there was not this kind of flexibility. You were a right back, you played right back, left back. Everybody had to stay in its own part of the field, or even following the striker or the regista of the other team wherever he went. Like, we have stories of players going to the locker, telling to the stopper, "Are you following me in the bathroom as well?" That was typical Italian approach for a stopper, which in some way we lost completely. I believe that the last of that generation has been Fabio Cannavaro. The last central defender able to play in a line of four, but at the same time with all the necessary skills to really mark the opposite striker. Today, that's something that they mark a number 9 like a Lewandowski at 2 meters distance. That's why we see so many goals that we were not used to see at the time. So others like, Salvatore Bagni, another player that got less than he deserved, possibly in the national team. It was fantastic with Napoli, with Maradona. I consider that he started his career as a number 9, then he moved to winger, and then became a great mediano. He could run for like 2 games without stopping. The Napoli should have been included in the team a lot earlier, but more than everybody else, Franco Baresi. But the problem is that if you have not a senator, a fantastic player, man like Gaetano Scirea, nobody can remove him from the team. Sometimes we all know that should be the players stepping out and say, okay, now it's the time for somebody else. But when there is a World Cup, that's a tough choice. Scirea had been around since 1972 when he moved from Atalanta to Juventus. He had a long career, fantastic, but in 1986 was really not in his prime anymore, and he had not been for a while. Franco Baresi possibly we lost some of his best years as a libero, as a central defender, because of Berzot's stubbornness and not having him challenging Gaetano Scirea, even play him as a mediano, which was crazy, really, really crazy. Plus, in the end, Roberto Mancini, possibly the classiest player of that generation, since 1980, when he started in Serie A with Bologna, he was 16. But I can tell you that from 1982, he could have played everywhere. Berzot didn't really see him at the time. A 21, 22, 23-year-old player was supposed to play only with the youth team. It's true that in Italy we had so many top players that you could afford that kind of approach. But in 86, things were changing. But Berzot, again, was possibly the last representative of the past. And also of the past school of training Azzurri coaches. Yes, then also we had Azeglio Vicini, but because he had the under 21. Indeed, after Azeglio Vicini, we never had anybody else growing there. Just Cesare Maldini, but in the middle, we also had started with Arrigo Sacchi to change the system completely. We followed what was going on in other countries, getting possibly the best coach of Serie A. And now, like it's happening today with Spalletti, and before him with Mancini and others. The only one that we missed was Fabio Capello, unfortunately. At the time, there were talks of him possibly joining the national team, but didn't work. Again, at the time, there was the Federation School, and so it's Berzot Vicini that we changed. Very conservative.
So, despite this sad end to his reign and the rotten tomatoes welcome back from Mexico, what was Berzot's overall legacy in charge of the national team?
Again, 78 was his miracle. He built a perfect team. He was able to pick young players. Also, Berzot was younger. We look at those pictures, he looked like he was younger than me in 1978. He looked a lot older than I am today, which is weird. Just things change. If you look at the Panini football cards of those time, a 20, 22 years old look like a 50 years old today. Everything is different. But he still had a young mindset. Then he became conservative. He was such a good man that he became too attached to his own man on the field, which is always a limit. And let me say that Arrigo Sacchi had the same problem and made the same mistake and we would see it in the future. He played, for example, Roberto Baggio and Daniele Massaro in the World Cup final in 1994, just because they were the ones that brought Italy to the final. But Massaro couldn't even run anymore. Baggio was injured that day. He played with a huge tape on his femoral bicep. So, and recognition is great, but it's not ideal. Never brings any result. Even Prandelli in 2012 in the European Championship final against Spain. Italy was great until the semifinal, but Chiellini, Thiago Motta, and others were completely out of shape. They couldn't run. Italy got destroyed by Spain, which was obviously possibly better, but you couldn't lose 4-0 with with another kind of team in a better shape. Just because the coach always feels that he needs to, if somebody brings you there, you need to rely on those players. That doesn't work. They never learn the lesson. I know it's easy because we like to watch old football. It's easy to see things with the eyes of the past, but I can tell you that these things were told by several people before the World Cup, during the World Cup, and so it's not something that it's easy to say just today, 40 years later.
In some ways, he was too loyal to certain players, but then there were other players that he chose to ignore. Bruzzo, you've mentioned, he barely wanted to pick him. Beccolossi, he didn't pick at all. He obviously had certain very strict ways of picking his team and selecting his squads.
Yeah, he thwarted the career of several players for several years. People really like Baresi, Donadoni, and Mancini. Huge loss for the national team with only bad results because 84, we didn't qualify for the championship. 86, we were never really in the game. And we lost so many games and we had embarrassing games. If I think about Cyprus, Greece, Norway, come on. And today it would be normal because football in general is a lot more balanced. But at the time, the distance was huge. That was unacceptable.
In a way, Italy were victims of Bearzot's success because even though there was no progress after 1982, it was difficult to remove a manager who had won the World Cup. So they had to persevere with him. Just to touch up on what Paul mentioned about Beccolossi, there's a story ahead of the 1982 World Cup at the airport. I guess a little girl approached Bearzot and complained in a very harsh manner about why Beccolossi was not included. And Bearzot slapped. He said something like, I treated her like I would treat my own child, something like that. I'm sure you know the story better.
Yeah, he slapped the girl.
Yeah.
Something that today would cost you the job immediately.
Yes.
Nothing really happened. But let me say that the signals of a failure were all there. The year before, the Azzurri went on a tour in Mexico, and there was a huge polemic since the landing because the federation decided, not to meet the journalists. They did the same when they landed in Mexico again, where there were hundreds of journalists waiting. The journalists started to talk about groups. Conti was pissed because Bearzot always talked about how good was Vialli. Tancredi was depressed because he realized that Galli was going to be the number one after all this back and forth. Rossi was living by himself, thinking about his own things. So also, Zenga and Bergomi were talking too much. There was a little bit of anarchy. You know why? There was no Zoff. Because Bearzot was great. But in 1982, the real glue of that team, and was also the face of the team towards the media, the world, was Dino Zoff. Indeed, was the only one allowed to speak to the press. And he was the one giving the direction to everybody, respected by everybody. In Mexico, there was no leader. And, a team without a leader, which doesn't mean it's the best of the team. You know that. That's what also was missing a lot in Mexico 86 and along those years.
I guess maybe one good quality that you can say about Bearzot, and I'm sure in the end it didn't serve him well, but it was his, like you mentioned, his stubbornness and his sticking to his principles that worked up to a point, but not in his last final years. There's a story that I believe was 1977. Italy at Rome, I believe they were going to host Belgium. There was a lot of clamoring from the local officials to select some Lazio and Roma players in the match. Because as you remember, at the time, it was a Juventus-Torino block. And Bearzot refused any such demands. And he said, I'm paid to look after the team, not the bank account. And that sums up his principles that I guess served him up to a point.
And that day, I remember the only Lazio player on the field was Manfredonia. And he didn't call anybody from AS Roma, which honestly at the time wasn't really a very good team. He didn't care. It was only Paolo Conti on the bench. That's it. That was, and in general at the time, it was this tradition that Italy, it's not like today that you play in big stadium. Italian fans were not like the English ones. You know, the Azzurri never had such a huge bunch of fans going around, filling the stadium. I think it's the result of unfortunately, fascist World War II. There was not this passion for the flag. Things changed in the late 90s. Until then, that's why the Azzurri used to play in very small stadium. But at the same time, you're playing in Avellino, you call the Napoli. You're playing in Napoli, you call the Napoli player. You play in Udine, you call the Udinese player. You know, to have the people supporting you. Many times we're playing in Milan or in the Olympic or in Rome, and the stadium was never full. Today is different. But at the time, Italy was playing in a stadium of 25,000 people several times. It was a different world. But Bearzot, again, was very stubborn. Didn't listen to anybody. That was it. He didn't have friends, especially in the media. What was his fault as well? Because I believe that part of the role of the national team coach is also to create the right environment, the right climate around the team, and dealing with the media is part of it. You can make it play in a way that they don't exist, or they're just your enemy. It can play once, but usually they always play against you.
So, in closing, what did the future of Italy look like at this point?
Everybody was very hopeful because we were watching the best Serie A ever. So that was already a good thing. Azeglio Vicini was very well respected. It was anyway part of Bearzot team together with Cesare Maldini, and was the coach of the under-21. Then we knew that let's say the kids coming from the under-21 were very good. Like as I was saying, Roberto Mancini, Franco Baresi was ready to be back. Vialli finally was going to be played as a central striker and not as a winger, which was not his role. But obviously, he was young. He was just happy to play. And there were other good players coming up like Riccardo Ferri and Giuseppe Giannini. So the outlook was good. Everybody was very hopeful, and after the negativity of the Bearzot leaving and all the senators leaving or retiring, everybody felt okay. Now it's our time. We have the World Cup in 1990. We have to get it right, and we have to win it. And honestly, we should have won it. We would have deserved it, but in the end, who deserves is only who wins. So that's how it went.
With that, I would like to thank you for this interview and your participation in this series. All our respective contact informations are listed on the blog and podcast listings. So thank you very much, and hope to continue these interviews on the Italian national team and the Serie A in the future with you.
Happy to be here. Thanks, Sean. Thanks, Paul. Honestly, Sean, thanks for everything you do on your Soccernostalgia blog. What you're doing also with this podcast, I believe that one day should be included in the Library of Congress. For everybody who loves the football that we love, this is a huge, huge source of information. And what you've done in collecting all the materials that you didn't just collect them, you published them. So you made them available for everybody. That's a fantastic thing, really. Well, thank you.
Me and Paul certainly love what we're doing. So thank you. Appreciate it. Thanks again.
Thank you. Good to catch up, Franco.
Anytime.